Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and mothers. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Hereditary. This 2018 supernatural horror film follows a grieving family after the passing of their mysterious matriarch. Her daughter Annie begins to unravel a terrifying conspiracy involving her own children, but it becomes increasingly unclear if this threat is real or if Annie has finally inherited her mother's delusions. Hereditary was written and directed by Ari Aster, one of the most notable horror directors of recent years. He quickly burst onto the scene with Hereditary, which was immediately followed up with Midsommar in 2019. His most recent film is the 3-hour surrealistic odyssey Beau is Afraid, which was the beginning of him branching out to further genres. Aster is deeply associated with A24, the production company that has produced all of his films thus far. And both Aster and A24 have been tied to a big buzzword in the horror community known as elevated horror. It's a contentious term people have been using for a particular style of art house psychological horror for the past 15 years or so, and the exact definition is pretty vacuous. Basically, it's horror with rich subtext and themes, and it's exploring more than simply trying to scare an audience with a monster or killer. I think it's a pretty silly term, as auteur cinema, subversive messaging, and boundary-pushing filmmaking has existed as long as the medium itself has. It's not something entirely new that we've never seen before, and if you don't believe me, go watch my reviews of Rosemary's Baby, Sisters, Suspiria, The Shining, Videodrome, Manhunter, or Audition for plenty of proof. Directors like Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, Brandon Cronenberg, Jordan Peele, Yorgos Lanthimos, and Jennifer Kent are just some of the newer minds combining the rich history of horror with complex themes, subtext, and social commentary. Sorry, kind of started off on a tangent there, but I think it's important to discuss because Hereditary has kind of become the poster boy for elevated horror, and a lot of people either fucking love or fucking hate elevated horror. Go to Rotten Tomatoes or Letterboxd or any other public forum to just see the giant schism that exists. But I encourage both parties to broaden their horizons. If you only like elevated horror, get off your fucking high horse and let yourself have some fun. And if you've written off elevated horror as artsy-fartsy bullshit, I encourage you to disregard that label and watch the movies for yourselves because a lot of them kick ass. And Hereditary is one of the ones that kicks a lot of ass, so let's get back to it. Aster originally developed the script as a family tragedy, taking inspiration from domestic dramas, with it eventually evolving into a full-blown horror. The film has a stellar cast, starring Toni Collette from The Sixth Sense and Nightmare Alley as Mother and miniature artist Annie, Gabriel Byrne from The Usual Suspects and Miller's Crossing as Father and psychiatrist Steve, Alex Wolff from My Friend Dahmer and Old as 16-year-old son Peter, Millie Shapiro from Broadway performances including Matilda as 13-year-old daughter Charlie, and Ann Dowd from Mass and Compliance as a grieving woman named Joan. Go check out my Compliance review if you haven't seen it. I'm pretty sure it's non-monetized because of the content, but it's a good review. Filming began in 2017, with most interior shots being done on sound stages. Aster and cinematographer Paweł Pogorzelski of films like Fresh and Midsommar leaned into the uncanny nature of these fake rooms by removing walls for certain scenes to get weird shots a traditional room wouldn't allow for. Annie's miniatures, models of the home that were used for several shots, as well as the film's gruesome practical effects were supervised by visual effects veteran Steve Newburn of films like Inception and The Dark Knight. The score was composed by Colin Stetson of films like Color Out of Space and The Menu, and the film was edited by Jennifer Lame of Tenet and Oppenheimer. So yeah, this is just a crazy cast and crew to have on your feature-length debut. Hereditary premiered at Sundance before hitting theaters, where it ultimately grossed $88 million at the box office. It proved to be a huge success on a small $10 million budget and became A24's fourth highest grossing film of all time. The film mostly got stellar reviews from critics who loved the impactful performances, technical craftsmanship, and shocking moments. General audiences have had more mixed reactions, with some finding the characters shallow, the plot confusing, and the film itself being overrated. It currently has a 90 and 71% on Rotten Tomatoes, so you can see a slight discrepancy there, although a solid 4 on Letterboxd indicates that most people love this film. And I'm one of them. I will say that my hype for it has died down just a little bit after a few watches, but I still consider it one of the very best horror films of the 21st century so far. Thank you so much to my patron, the 4 Mood Groups, for requesting Hereditary for me to review. I'm really shocked I haven't covered an Aster film on the channel yet, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun. And for those of you who don't like this movie, I encourage you to stick around and have a lively debate in the comments, because whether you love it or not, I'd love to talk about the film. But with all of that said, it's probably time we get started. Grab your EpiPens, folks, because we're watching Hereditary. The movie opens with an obituary for Ellen Lee, who passed away at the ripe old age of 78. She is joining her husband Martin and son Charles at the pearly gates, and she is survived by her daughter Annie, Annie's husband Steve Graham, and their 2 children Peter and Charlie. The opening shots showcase Charlie's treehouse, Annie's art studio, and a baller miniature of the Graham house, which slickly transitions into the real bedroom of Peter. Steve wakes the sleepy lad along with sleepy Charlie, who spent the night in her treehouse. I mean, it's a cool ass treehouse to be fair. They arrive at Ellen's funeral, where Annie is surprised to see so many unfamiliar faces. We learn that Ellen was a private person with a lot of anxieties. There were times when that strained her relationship with her family.
She had private rituals, private friends, private anxieties. She was a very difficult woman to read. If you ever thought you knew what was going on with her, and God forbid you tried to confront that.
Charlie looks over Grandma and her fine-ass jewelry, but also catches the attention of this creepy-ass dude. Oh, better get this out of the way right now. Charlie clicks her tongue.
That was your opinion, and you...
It's kinda her thing. She also has a nut allergy. Remember that for later. The Grahams return to their baller home, where most of the family is admittedly not that sad about Ellen's death.
A little sad? Okay, I get it.
Annie is a miniature artist who makes a living selling her work in galleries, and it seems her practice often involves recreating moments from her own life. Charlie's got her own creative thing going on as well, but it's a bit more Francis Bacon or Hieronymus Bosch inspired. We learn Charlie was Ellen's favorite, which came with its own horrifying perks.
Even when you were a little baby, she wouldn't let me feed you because she needed to feed you. She was crazy.
But Charlie also notes that Grandma wanted her to be a boy. Interesting. Charlie wonders who will take care of her after Annie dies, and Annie finds some nonsense written on the wall. Annie briefly looks through one of her mom's photo albums, but quickly puts it away, and in a spiritualism book she finds a goodbye letter. In it, Ellen asks Annie to forgive her for her many secrets and tells her not to mourn her losses. Their sacrifice will pale in comparison to the rewards. Interesting. Good night, Ellen. We'll see you soon. Oh shit, I didn't know we'd be seeing that much of you though. At school, Charlie's toy making is interrupted by a suicidal pigeon, which is probably a bad omen. Well, when life gives you lemons, huh, Charlie? Yes ma'am, can I help you?
We've been trying to contact you regarding your car's extended warranty.
Peter's too busy perving to notice a classic classroom thematic breakdown of what's happening.
So he thinks he has control. But let's all remember, Sophocles wrote the oracle so that it was unconditional, meaning Heracles never had any choice, right?
Yeah, Peter is not picking up what the script is putting down. He needs to take some notes from Laurie Strode. During Ellen's final years, she moved in with the family, and Annie finds her very witchy room suspiciously left open. Yeah, we'll just keep that shit locked. Damn, and Ellen's grave has been desecrated. Steve doesn't tell Annie about this, and Annie supposedly goes to see a movie. She's secretly going to a grief support group, and after reluctantly introducing herself, Annie spills the tea.
And she didn't have an easy life. She had DID, which became extreme at the end, and dementia. And my father died when I was a baby from starvation because he had psychotic depression. My older brother had schizophrenia. And when he was 16, he hanged himself in my mother's bedroom. And of course, his suicide note went to her, accusing her of putting people inside him. So.
Anyone else want to go? They had a no contact rule until Annie got pregnant with Charlie, who Ellen immediately stuck her hooks into. Then she got sick and died in their home, and Annie feels this immense blame for entangling her children into this mess. Meanwhile, Pothead Peter has gotten word of a big party tomorrow night, and he doesn't notice somebody watching from the treehouse. Annie's gallerists reach out to touch base about her upcoming show, and Charlie is visited by a mysterious moving light. It leads her out to a very well-traveled yard where she spots a crispy grandma. Uh-oh. Peter asks if he can borrow the car for a quote-unquote school barbecue, and as the two tensely go back and forth, he ultimately gets stuck bringing Charlie to the party. Charlie doesn't want to, Peter obviously doesn't want her, but Annie demands it. Yay, brother-sister bonding. Oh, that's a familiar looking symbol on that telephone pole. I wonder what it means. Honestly, this party looks pretty mid. I mean, who bakes a super nut-filled cake mid-party? Poor planning in my opinion. Peter finds that depressed chick he has the hots for and offers her some weed, abandoning his strange, likely autistic little sister to fend for herself. Hey, at least there's cake to eat. Charlie chows down and Peter tokes up, and they both end up with scratchy throats.
It's hard to breathe.
Yeah, Charlie's having an allergic reaction and her throat is closing up, so the very high teenager tosses his sis in the car and rushes to a hospital. I assume y'all know where this is going, but buckle up if not. Peter looks back in horror to see that Charlie got completely beheaded by the telephone pole. The shocked, teary-eyed young man simply drives home. He silently heads inside and lays in bed, although it's clear he doesn't get a wink of sleep. That morning, Annie finds her headless daughter in the back seat, and poor Peter lays there while she screams. Oh yeah, there's the money shot. Annie goes through the fucking ringer as she grieves Charlie.
I just want to die!
All while Peter listens to the misery he inadvertently caused. Charlie goes to sleep with the worms, another weird word gets written over Annie's pillow. Steve spends the night in Charlie's room, and Annie spends the night in the treehouse. Peter is revisiting Charlie's death everywhere he goes, and the poor guy has a panic attack after smoking a bowl. Annie callously watches as her own son struggles to enter his home, and instead of talking with him, she heads to the therapy group. Just as she gets ready to chicken out though, a woman named Joan flags her down. She recognized Annie from when she stopped in a few months ago, and Annie shares that she's lost her daughter since then. Joan lost a son and grandson who drowned, and she gives Annie her number in case she ever needs someone to talk to. Tensions between Annie and Steve have gotten worse as she is gone all the time and she spends every night in the treehouse. Peter starts hearing Charlie's signature tongue click, someone drops off an invitation to a seance, and Annie is falling further behind her gallery deadlines. She stops by Joan's apartment, noticing that she has a welcome mat just like the ones her mom used to make.
My mother used to embroider ones just like that.
Did she really? Isn't that funny?
She discusses the traumatic way that she found Charlie's body, and Joan asks about her relationship with Peter. Turns out it's been strained for a while. Apparently, Annie used to sleepwalk, and one night she doused herself, Peter, and Charlie in paint thinner and nearly set them all on fire.
Impossible to convince them that it was just sleepwalking.
which of course it was.
Peter, unsurprisingly, held it against her and began to distrust and argue with her from then on. Steve finds Annie's latest art project and finally voices his frustration.
It's not about him.
Oh, no?
No, it's a neutral view of the accident.
This brings us to the dinner scene, which is truly the centerpiece of the family drama aspect of the film. She sneers at the two having a nice conversation, at which point Peter asks if she has something she'd like to say.
I mean, why would I want to say something so I could watch you sneer at me?
Yeah, fine, release me. Just say it. Just fucking say it. Don't you swear at me, you little shit!
She knows it was an accident and that he's in pain as well, but he has never apologized or taken responsibility for what he did, so she can't accept or forgive him.
All I do is worry and slave and defend you, and all I get back is that fucking face on your face, because nobody admits anything they've done!
Peter points out that she's the one who forced Charlie to go to that party, and Annie ultimately walks away in frustration. A few days later, she runs into Joan at a craft store, and she's got some very good news. She met with a spiritual medium who was hosting a seance, and despite going in completely skeptical, she witnessed a human spirit be conjured. The medium met with Joan at her apartment and conjured her grandson. She convinces Annie to come see for herself, and Joan calls out to her grandson Louis. Annie's skepticism quickly falls away when Louis begins sliding a glass, touching her hair, and literally writing on a chalkboard.
Hi, Louis.
Annie is obviously shook by this insane revelation, but before she goes, Joan gives her an instruction manual on how to conjure Charlie.
Read this out loud, every syllable, very carefully.
That night, Annie wakes to find ants crawling around her bed, and she follows them to find Peter dead and rotting in his bed. Ugh, I fucking hate ants. This is a nightmare. Looks like this is a nightmare for Annie as well, as she wakes up to realize she sleepwalked into Peter's room.
I never wanted to be your mother.
Ooh, goddamn, we're just being honest now, huh? Annie explains that she feared being a mother due to her own, and she even tried to abort Peter, but she swears she loves him even as she lights a match and sets her baby ablaze. Fortunately, this was all a dream though. In reality, she's frantically waking Peter up to apologize, telling him and Steve to get up so they can try something. Steve is hella reluctant to, but eventually agrees to participate, and Peter feels the air flexing around them before Charlie moves the glass. Annie asks Charlie to draw for them, claiming she did it before, but Steve demands they stop whatever this is. Charlie breaks a glass and ignites a candle, and it seems she has entered the body of Annie.
Hello?
Mom?
Why are you scaring them?
Steve yeets a cup of water on Annie to snap her out of it, and she seems to have no memory of what just took place. Great bonding activity, Annie. I think y'all are on the up and up from here on out. Another strange phrase, lift touch pandemonium, is written in Annie's studio, and the next day at school, Peter sees that pesky floating light. He also sees a very happy reflection in the mirror before hearing a tongue click. Steve angrily calls Annie to tell her that Peter is terrified that he's being haunted by a vengeful spirit, and from now on, his top priority is protecting his son. This is followed up by a voicemail from her gallery, and the continuous pressure of finishing her show finally causes her to snap. The boys come home and notice a nasty smell and find Annie's miniature path of destruction. Steve recuses himself to the couch with the help of some sleeping pills, but that night Annie finds Charlie making some lovely drawings of her brother. Peter gets a visit from her as well. He gets grabbed by someone under the bed, and it's unclear if it was Annie or if she truly just ran in to help. She tells him she is putting a stop to all of this, but I have my doubts. She grabs the fucked up sketchbook and yeets it into the fire, at which point her sleeve catches on fire as well. Realizing that she and the sketchbook are connected due to the seance, she pulls it out and stamps out the fire. She runs over to Joan's the next day. Nobody's home, but we finally get confirmation that Joan is not the nice, grieving woman she claims to be. Peter finally meets her as well, but it is not a very warm welcome.
I expel you!
Annie returns home and finds some more of her mom's doormats, along with some other demonology books. She finds a bookmarked page about King Payman, one of Satan's minions who can possess a vulnerable human host. He also prefers a male host. Oh yeah, those who summon him will earn lots of moolah both on Earth and in Hell. She also finds a photo album filled with her mysterious friends, and it becomes apparent that Joan, along with many of the people at Ellen's funeral, were members of some kind of cult. And it appears that Ellen was the queen bee of it all. Oh shit, there is literally documentation of the cult praying beneath a photo of her family inside the Graham's attic. Steve is contacting a fellow psychiatrist about Annie's condition when he finally gets an update on the grave desecration, which is more of a grave robbery. Annie goes up to the attic and finds it's full of flies, which is likely due to the headless corpse laying in there. Meanwhile, Peter gets full on possessed. And smashes his face against the desk. I fucking love this one black kid that is so fucking unfazed by what's happening. Day drinking Steve picks up his broken-nosed son, and at a red light he finally breaks down into tears. My man can't even pull into the driveway without his wife shoveling more fucked up news down his throat. She frantically explains that her mom's headless body is in the attic, and Steve quickly goes from not believing her to believing that she's the one who dug up the grave and put it there. She tries to explain that this woman Joan has been manipulating her and she accidentally invited some kind of evil spirit into their home, but Steve is so far past listening to anything she has to say. She tries to explain that they need to destroy this book to break the connection, but it will also kill her in the process. She can't bring herself to burn the book and asks Steve to do it, but he's convinced she's completely snapped.
I'm not going to do this with you anymore. No, it's not helpful.
Annie yeets the book into the fire herself, only for Steve to burst into flames. Annie becomes possessed by Payman, and a bunch of naked people congregate around the Graham house that night. Peter wakes up, not noticing his mom fucking hanging out on the ceiling. What you doing up there, Annie? Don't want to talk? That's okay. Oh, and looks like someone's putzing around in the yard. Peter finds his extra crispy papa on the living room floor, and he turns around to find a very happy naked man. You may recognize him from the funeral. Annie appears and chases Peter back upstairs, and for some goddamn reason he decides to hide in the attic. Annie really wants to get in there. Ellen's body is gone, but he does find a nice picture of himself. Annie also found a way in through an open window, and now she's levitating and using a wire saw to behead herself. Go watch my review of Audition if you're into this shit. Oh look, more naked people, hi! Peter yeets himself out the window as Annie finishes her head removal, and the shiny little ball transfers itself into him. Peter wakes to see his headless mama float into the treehouse, but a tongue click indicates that it's no longer Peter inside. Many naked onlookers rejoice as Peter makes his way into the treehouse, where even more naked cultists are kneeling before a terrifying statue with Charlie's head attached to it. Aw, it's a grandmother, mother, granddaughter reunion. Joan takes the crown from Charlie and places it atop Peter's head, also providing some clarity on the situation.
Charlie, you're all right now. You are Payman, one of the 8 kings of hell.
She tells Payman that they've corrected his first female body, giving him a healthy male to reside in. They reject the Holy Trinity and directly worship him, and she asks that he share his ancient knowledge and wealth. The movie ends with the cult worshiping their new deity. And that's Hereditary. Sorry to my A24 haters in the house, but this is a fantastic horror film as well as a fantastic family drama. I'd say there are very few horror films that capture such effective feelings of dread, sorrow, and tension. Watching the Graham family completely dissolve and then ultimately be completely annihilated is so tragic, but you also get such a sinister sense from the start that you can't help but feel like this family is doomed. Annie's miniatures are a really cool component, specifically serving so well as stand-ins for real people, rooms, and buildings. They sneak these miniatures into multiple shots throughout the film, representing the lack of control the Graham family truly has. The whole family has been manipulated by Ellen, the cult followers, and Payman. Their moves and decisions are not truly their own. They are practically dolls in a dollhouse, completing someone else's devious plan. I have seen a fair amount of people say they didn't understand the film after a first watch, or even after a couple watches, and that's one of the main reasons they don't like it. And that is somewhat fair, as it can be a little hard to follow, so let me break it down really quick. Grandma Ellen is the leader of a cult that worships the demon king Payman. She wanted to conjure Payman to get rich and do evil stuff, and Payman specifically needed to live inside of a male host, so she attempted to put the demon inside of her own son. He committed suicide over this, but everyone, including his sister Annie, just chalked it up to mental illness. Ellen, being the crazy cult leader that she is, was not able to maintain a good relationship with Annie, especially when she began fixating over Peter when he was born. Annie cut her off and didn't see Ellen for years, although it can be assumed Ellen was keeping tabs on her. When Charlie was born, Ellen was able to wriggle her way back into their lives, and at some point Ellen was able to put Payman into Charlie. Maybe it was the breast milk. Payman was the one inside Charlie's body, but the whole time he believed he was simply Charlie. The cult feared revealing the truth to Payman, or basically waking him up, as his current body would displease him. Charlie was always a temporary, imperfect host in Ellen's eyes, and her goal was always to get Payman into Peter. To switch Payman into another person, you have to kill the current host, but also make the new host reach a vulnerable enough state through traumatic events. So Ellen concocted a very complicated plan that would take place after her own death, starting with the death of Charlie. Charlie's death released Payman so he could move around freely in a less physical form. And keep in mind that even before this point, cult members were already sneaking into the house to write satanic words, plant Ellen's body in the attic, and perform other rituals to make the transfer happen. This is also when Joan steps in to provide Annie the steps to invite Payman inside the rest of the family. Doing that dumbass seance allowed him access to their souls. Payman is the one who did the glass moving and Charlie impersonation, convincing Annie that she found her daughter. Payman is also the one who tricked Annie into burning Steve up, finally breaking her down enough to be possessed. Payman killed Annie, which finally broke Peter enough to be possessed as well. It also seems potentially necessary that 3 people are sacrificed, specifically beheaded, as a sort of payment to their god. But it seems Payman doesn't necessarily know he's himself at the very end, as he spent so much time in Charlie that it's the name he knows. The cult fills him in on the details, and soon they can presumably do whatever evil shit they plan to. I hope that clears it up a bit, but I also want to note that a lot of aspects of the film are left pretty ambiguous or are open to audience interpretation. Like, how the fuck could the cult plan for Charlie to eat nuts at some party? The world may never know. But 2010's horror, especially paranormal horror, really started relying on jump scares and really familiar generic versions of Christian demons or ghosts. And I do consider Hereditary to be one of the more unique takes on possession that we've gotten in many years. Aside from that one illustration and that fucked up statue at the end, we never really get a physical representation of what Payman looks like. There is no particular ghoul or goblin to think of when you think of Hereditary. It's really just the horrific moments and the great performances that stick with you. Gabriel Byrne and Alex Wolff fill their roles perfectly, ranging from skeptical to angry to terrified. But Toni Collette is obviously the star of the show. This is a career-defining performance. The more I watch the film, the more I absolutely hate Annie, her disdain for Peter, and the series of stupid decisions that she makes. But I completely understand the decision she makes and the frustration and anxiety she feels. It's a rare case where those poor decisions make sense and feel earned. Annie may or may not have inherited any kind of mental illness from Ellen, but she was passed on a life of trauma, paranoia, and grief that in turn affected her own children. On a more conceptual level, the film is exploring what exactly is passed down from parent to child and the kinds of pain that can be passed on from generation to generation. Much like Annie's fear of becoming a mother, many people worry about becoming their parents and passing on the same kinds of trauma that they experienced as children. The film also totally captures the feeling of an intense dinner table argument, and if you haven't experienced that in life, I'm truly envious of you. A lot of horror films rely on a family moving to a new house or being on the road for some kind of evil to encounter them, but the Payman cult snuck the evil into the one place the Grahams should have felt safe. Hereditary takes a move right out of Rosemary's Baby's playbook, warning that out of all the people in the world, it may be those who are supposed to protect you that may be trying to hurt you. It predominantly forgoes jump scares, although it fits little mini ones in throughout, starting as a slow burn and building into an intense pressure cooker. It boasts an incredible atmosphere and performances, shocks with some truly gruesome deaths, and slowly unravels a complex mystery that will leave you guessing until the very end. It is not a fun watch by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't consider it a great frequent watch, but I do consider it one of the best horror movies of the 21st century and one you should definitely go and see for yourself. It borrows from a lot of horror movies that came before it, and you can feel that kind of love for the genre ingrained into this film, but it also takes those influences and gives them a unique twist to be fresh and interesting. Well, that's about it. Thank you again to my patron, the 4 Mood Groups, for picking Hereditary for me to review. I'm so glad that I've got it on the channel now. And remember, you too can request movies for me to review by becoming a patron. There will be a link down below. But what do y'all think about Hereditary? I know it's a hot topic, so please share your opinions with me down in the comments. Please start arguments with me or with each other. It's really good for the YouTube algorithm. And be sure to join me next week as we are finally starting the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. It's gonna be really good at the start, and then it's gonna get really awful for a little while, and then it'll get kind of good again, and then it's gonna get really fucking awful again. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Hereditary. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks, y'all.